Welcome back to Beyond the Tour. This is episode 16. Luke, how are you?
Hey, Jake. We're doing not so bad. I'm sounding a bit worse for the wear, but feeling better than I sound. And coming out the back of the 2 weeks of Olympics and now having a little bit of, I guess, post-Olympics depression, particularly now that we won't get to see RayGun perform anymore.
The old breakdancing in the Olympics, I'm glad it's not coming back.
Well, let's hope it doesn't make a return for Brisbane. We know it's not going to be making an appearance at LA, but let's hope us crazy Queenslanders don't make some silly decisions around breakdancing. But what was your take on RayGun? Was it legit or was she actually taking the piss, do you think?
I wasn't very happy with it. I wasn't very impressed with it. There seems to be some sort of statement. Some of these events that we saw unfold at the Olympics, on one hand, make it very hard to take it seriously. And then when you're trying to weigh up the fact that I was saying last week that Olympic golf is going to be on the same level as majors, Ray busting out the jumping kangaroo, and you think, Jesus Christ, this is definitely not up onto that level.
Pretty crazy scenes, really. And I wasn't sure whether it was a piss take or it was a real deal.
No, me either. But having said that, we saw a one man finish at the Wyndham on Monday morning. And what can we take seriously in the golf world?
It was the PGA Tour's equivalent of RayGun getting up and doing the dancing kangaroo, Kuch. Bursting back into the headlines, Kuch, wasn't he?
Kuch. Maybe unfairly so. We will discuss that. Lydia Ko winning gold at the Golf Nationale. That was really good. As I said last week, I think that course is pretty awesome for a professional event. Very similar to Sawgrass is where I feel for it. Aaron Rai took out the Wyndham Championship.
Your boy, Aaron.
Yeah. This is where you get all the hot takes, and they're all coming true. And then over on the Asian Tour, which is a pretty good event as well in the UK, Peter Uihlein bet Andy Sullivan and Caleb Surat. So there's a little bit there to discuss. So maybe we'll start with the Olympics. I think that was certainly the biggest event of the weekend. And Lydia Ko, that's gold, silver, and bronze from 3 tries.
That's right. Completes the medal slam. A great sort of achievement for her now into the Hall of Fame as a result of closing out the gold. And what a stellar career she's had, Lydia. You just look at some of the achievements and highlights. Second youngest player to be entered into the Hall of Fame behind Carrie Webb. The youngest person to achieve world number 1 at 17. She won her first LPGA title at 15, 20-odd LPGA titles, a couple of majors, and now 3 Olympic medals of each colour. One of the great golfers of her generation, that's for sure.
Absolutely. She had that 2 or 3 year period, even it's still a little bit of a hangover from it at the moment, where she went into the golfing wilderness. And maybe if not for that, we'd probably be saying she's probably upside along Annika Sorenstam as probably one of the greatest. She's had a super solid career, and certainly of the active golfers, she's certainly in that conversation as to being the best.
As you say, in the wilderness there for a bit and a great comeback. This is a sensational result for her and for New Zealand.
Did you ever try the A-swing?
Tell me about it.
That's initially what sent her down that path. She was with David Ledbetter, and he had that A-swing going on, which is up almost like a Matt Wolf going on. So pulled it up really vertical and then dropped it into the slot. That sort of is what appeared to have ruined her initially.
This must have come about whilst you were doing hunting scratch, right? All this research, swings and Ledbetter theories.
It did. It certainly did. Hey, the Golf Nationale, I think this, again, just cemented in my mind how good that course is for the pros. And it's probably not renowned in terms of its architectural values. For the pros, it presented a test. There was enough challenge and there was enough variety to make it interesting as a viewer. But it was an really awesome track. It really tested the pros.
And I think we got a little bit more of what we would like to see in the women's event because the course had dried out a bit more and it was playing a bit firmer. You saw that on the opening tee shot with a lot more balls going into the water on the left-hand side. So I think the bones are there of a brilliant course where you could certainly shave down quite a few banks in trouble areas and get that Augusta-style feel where the ball might hit but not be high enough and then roll back in. So I'm not saying it competes architecturally with Augusta, but as you said, Sawgrass is another sort of comparison, creating that stadium. We did call it out as a great amphitheatre or theatre for drama last week, and it produced again in the women's.
That first hole was a really good example. That's also what I was thinking of driving into work this morning. Just the fact that like they don't need to take on that much. I think obviously just the fact that it's enticing enough for them to take the risk to get it down onto the elbow there on the fairway, and just with that little bit of extra run out, you would think, why not just lay back a bit further? But obviously that particular hole encourages the pros to take that risk. It was just crazy seeing how often it happened over the course of the day.
It was interesting to me, the difference in how the men played it to the women. The men were more than happy to be stuck in that right-hand rough. And I wonder whether they just felt that they could muscle their way out of that rough, even if they got in there, and they'd rather be right than too far left. Definitely more of the women were finding their way down to the left-hand side of that fairway. It was an interesting cost of two events, that's for sure.
So there was a bit of drama in that final round. Morgan Montreux was probably the biggest one, really. She was 7 over. She had a blow up in that last round of 79, and that really, I think, is just the pressure of the gold and the event and the platform.
You've got a feel for her 54-hole co-leader, and just exploded with a 79 to finish. Probably not tested in that type of cauldron and that type of environment before, and unfortunately it showed for her. Still managed to finish a respectable T18, but that'll be of little consolation to her, I'd imagine.
From the Aussie perspective, Hannah Green was threatening. Maybe she was a little bit early, so maybe it was a false sense of attacking that particular lead. But yeah, she would have been happy with that final round, I feel.
I was making a charge and probably got derailed by the double on 10, I think it was, when she was only 2 shots back. Maybe you're right. Maybe she was out early, but I still think posting a number at the Golf Nationale, knowing how tough some of those finishing holes are, could have put a bit more pressure on Lydia. As it was, she was able to maybe really just par her way home. But Hannah, great tournament for her, and she probably would be thinking, what if I didn't double 10? But nonetheless, she did Australia proud. And then Minjee never really got hot, did she? She had, I think, 3 rounds of 71 and a round of 74, so she just couldn't get the engines firing.
No, she couldn't. Other notables, I think, probably for me, Rose Zhang stood out for the Americans. She had a top 10 in the end. She's been a little bit hit and miss. She came out firing, winning her first event on the LPGA Tour, and then went a little bit quiet. I think she spent time finishing off her degree.
Yeah.
So she went back to school and finished that off, and hasn't really, given the raps and the way she started and the way she came out of college, probably hasn't lived up to expectations in her rookie season.
That's an interesting take. I probably haven't thought that much about it, probably because she is first year out and you temper those expectations. But she did have a huge amount of hype, and we know winning the women's AM at Augusta National there certainly creates a lot of expectation. I still think we'll see lots of positives from Rose, and for me, probably the disappointment was Celine Boutier. Came out of the gates really hot, and she was the first round leader in front of the home crowd, and I thought, here we go, we could really have an electric result here, having a French woman win in front of a very vocal French crowd, but it wasn't to be, unfortunately.
There's quite a lot of depth in the women's game. So she obviously, was it last year where she went through that period, she won a couple of majors, and she was the most informed competitor out there. And then Nelly popped up at the early part of this season. She's cooled off a little bit. I think it was that dog bite that got her. And the other thing I noticed, I didn't notice too many smoke clouds at the Golf Nationale.
So I didn't realise that there'd been a smoking ban, but it certainly affected Charlie Hull's play, right? Not able to get amongst the medals. And where did she finish in the end? T27 or something like that.
T27.
So not smoking was her kryptonite.
All right, let's jump across. We're looking at the Wyndham. So it was a rain-affected Wyndham. They didn't get off at all on the Thursday, so it was compacted into Friday. They didn't finish the Friday. They didn't finish the Saturday. On the Sunday, they actually completed round 2, 3, and 99.5% of round 4. So they had essentially 3 rounds in one day.
I think you're being kind at the 99 point. It's off into many how completed it was. A huge effort on the part of the greenskeepers and the ground staff there to actually get play. There'd been a massive amount of rain with Cyclone Debbie or Tropical Storm Debbie floating around the place through North Carolina there. Quite amazing that they were able to get most of the event finished by Sunday, except for, 3 shots as it turned out. Congrats to the tournament organisers and the ground staff for actually allowing a tournament to take place in such circumstances. And as you say, Two Gloves Rai was able to grind out a win. He's been showing really impressive form over the last 6 to 8 weeks and culminated now in his first PGA Tour victory.
He's been very consistently strong and solid. So it was great to see him get that particular win.
Consistently slow too.
Consistently slow. And I think that's, if we touch on the Kuchar thing, so there was a big sort of uproar, particularly on X, on Golf X, I think we'll call it, or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, about the fact that he held up everybody basically in terms of, or Kuchar decided to come back with 3 shots to go. Initially, it didn't make a lot of sense. Having looked at it and listened to a few different perspectives, and with hindsight, I would probably tend to side on Kuchar's side. Just because
Tell me why.
5 hours and 20 minutes they had to complete that final round before darkness, and they couldn't get it completed. So I think there could have been a bit of frustration on behalf of Kuchar, and I think it might have been a bit of an FU to event, maybe not organisers, or just their inability to actually enforce pace of play and get everybody around in 5.5 hours. But it's pretty ridiculous, like how long that it takes. Given the situation, like everyone understood, yes, you are pushing up to, 36 holes, 37 holes on the day. So there is going to be a little bit of fatigue towards the end. You can anticipate it taking a little bit longer, but it's ridiculous that we're seeing the amount of time it takes to complete professional golf rounds.
100% agree with you on that point. And maybe there might be some rigor to that argument. But for me, that Kuchar was making a point. But for me, the group behind him still finished.
Well, he's playing with Max Grazeman, wasn't he? And
the remainder of his group, I meant to say, the remainder of his group still finished out. He was the only one in that group not to finish. Is it darkness? Is it protest? You see the social media clips of him today after completing his round on Monday US time, and he's very apologetic for the situation that's been created. So I don't know if he was genuinely making a protest point around pace of play. I'm all here for that because we know that it's bad. I'm just not sure I believe it of Kuch.
Yeah. I don't know. I think he just got his wires confused in terms of how he communicated it, because the other thing is that he had line of sight relief as well with, I think, a scoreboard or something like that, because he put it out into the edges of the 10th fairway this morning or whenever it was yesterday. He had to take relief from that. So he had to get the official in to take relief. So given that it was quite dark and the amount of time that would have taken, potentially that sort of played into it as well. But there were certainly mixed messages. Like I think when he come off on the Sunday, and he said he was trying to set an example for Grazeman in terms of completing it. And then the Monday morning, he didn't really put anyone into it. He apologized, but he didn't hold the line in terms of, no, this was slow and I was making a statement, which maybe if he was to just do that initially, if that was his reasoning for it, then
yeah. And there's some other rumors circulating that he got the shits, that he hadn't been warned by officials that Rai's group, I think, was still in front in the fairway, and they allowed him to tee off, and he hit up on them. And so he took his toys and threw them out of the cot and went home. I'm not sure I buy that either. But it certainly lit up social media, didn't it? We had all manner of golf media and golf influencers commenting on it. You had Tron from NLU, you had Kyle Porter from CBS and First Cut, and Porath from Shotgun Start. So they were all piling in on Kuchar there. And the rhetoric there was that he can't win the tournament. He can't make the FedEx Cup playoffs, yet he's holding everybody up and coming back on a Monday to play, as it turned out, 2 shots, was it? Or 3 shots? 3 shots.
3 shots, yeah. The other thing is, like, why is this in the hands of the player? Like, why aren't officials calling darkness or not? Or it shouldn't be in the hands of the player. It's very similar to the slow play stuff. It's very hard to get frustrated at any of the slow players because it's not enforced. Absolutely, as a pro, in terms of with the money involved and the fact that this is their career, they should be taking every advantage that they can. And if an advantage for a golfer like Rai is taking so long and being so deliberate about everything, then go for it. I've got no problems at all with him.
And I think that's how kids are coached as well, right?
Yeah.
They are coached around their pre-shot routines, every shot. And look, I think there's got to be more leeway given to professionals than amateurs, right? So you will expect them to be more deliberate. But there are ways that they can improve the pace of play, and there is greater scope for officials to enforce the rules and create some downside and some detriment to actually make the players feel some pain when they don't meet timeframes. Then again, we hear Jay Monahan come out and say we need to fill the full allotted time that we've got on the broadcast. And then I guess if they go overtime, sometimes it even works better. So it's a scourge on the game, slow play. Rai, despite his win, he is a very slow player. Hopefully he can improve on that. And then the whole Kuchar thing was just, we were talking just on the pod the other week, last week or the week before, about the whole L2 can fiasco from Mayakoba. And maybe Kuch was just feeling a little bit out of the limelight. He's out of the spotlight. He's on the final stages of the PGA Tour, heading towards the Champions Tour. Just wanted to get himself back in the frame.
Someone needed to whisper in his ear, if we're coming back tomorrow, you're paying. He would have finished
that's
for
right.
sure.
We'll send you the bill for all the staff that have got to come back and work the extra day. I'm pretty sure he would have found a way to get through that darkness.
So that sort of lit up the Wyndham Championship.
And then just finally on that, there was a golf media commentator who did take the other side of the Kuchar bet. Trusty friend at Golf Channel, Eamon Lynch, came out and pointed out that the difference for Kuch between making a birdie and a par on the 18th was about 100K, and he would have considered coming back for that extra 100K. I just wonder whether he had given full consideration to the fact that Kuch has won $60 million in career prize money already.
To his credit, though, Kuch, he was looking at bogey, and he was able to salvage par.
He did. Well, he almost chipped in for birdie, right?
He did. Yeah. At the very least, he did pretty much everything he could to justify the fact that he came back.
Yep. Yeah, the chip in birdie would have been a nice touch.
That would have been a nice touch. All right, let's move on to the international series in England. As has been a trend, the Liv guys dominated again. Uihlein won by 7 shots in the end. I think he was a 63 final round. And from what I was dozing at the time, I'm going to say that he was maybe a shot or two up on Caleb Surat going into probably the midway of his round. So he's had a ripper back nine.
Off the back of shooting 10 under course record 61. So Uihlein definitely showing some form, and we'll talk about Liv Greenbrier coming up, but he's one of the guys that he's on one of the bubbles, and he needs to bring the form that he's shown in the International Series at England into Liv Greenbrier this coming week, just to cement his position. We've talked about Caleb Surat, and both of us have got raps on him. We've seen him live up and close, and we're hoping for big things. So what his last 2 starts in the International Series event, he's been T3 and T2. And if you get beaten by a bloke that's shooting 61 course records, you can't be too unhappy with where your game's at. We'd just like to probably see that translate into giving an individual title a real shake on Liv. He's been out there saying that his goal is to make the world top 100. So we're gonna see him compete in more of these Asia Tour events and other events around the world that attract AWGR points. And the drive behind that is that he wants to qualify for the PGA Championship at Quail Hollow next year, because that's his hometown. That'd be a great achievement if he's able to do it, and I'd love to see him fulfill that potential.
Chance we'll see him out in November, maybe in down under.
That'd be great. Are you hearing that?
I don't know. I'm just wondering if potentially if that's something that he would target with Neiman coming out last year and winning and getting into the Open as a result.
He's got 2 events he could play, right?
Maybe I'd love to see him, but in particular, it'd be a good event for that style of golfer. And with the Australian, I guess where I'm going to go back to the Masters, bringing out sort of high-end amateurs or young American talent has been a bit of a trend outside of the live connection. That would be something that would be good to see him out here.
I'd love to see him out here, and that would certainly spice up the field for the PGA, Australian PGA and the Oz Open. Are you planning to make your way up to Royal Queensland at all for the PGA Champs, or you'll just check out the Open down Kingston Heath?
Probably just the Open, I'd say. Yeah, I did a lot of travel the early part of this year. I'm just trying to stay home as much as possible. So I think the biggest thing with the Asian Tour, particularly International Series, is just seeing that huge, it's a chasm in terms of the jump up from that to contending on live. There's really not really been anyone that's been able to convert their form from the Asian Tour up into the live events. Kuch obviously dominating earlier in the year and end of last year, and he's been the closest. His form on live hasn't been as good this year as it was last year. But yeah, everybody, Andy Ogletree, you see the little cameos from time to time, John Catlin, but certainly not dominating. These guys who have dominated the Asian Tour have not coming up and dominating live either.
No, Catlin is probably the closest that's been able to achieve decent success, and as you say, Puig. But I expect that gap between the standard in the Asian Tour and the live standard to close over time, particularly if live invests more into these international series events, and they'll continue to get stronger the longer live is around. I just know, talking to some young aspiring pros in the local market here, that they see live as a viable career path now. And some of them are very much along the lines of, why would I go to America if I could go to live? So it's an interesting conversation now that you're starting to see amongst the younger fellows. And I guess they see a fellow like Jed Morgan and go, if Jed did it, maybe I can.
And the pathway, the Asian Tour pathway, as we've discussed it before, it allows them to be a lot closer to home or even base themselves out of Australia and play a lot of those events. The international swing in terms of prize money is up around a regular European Tour victory and in line or maybe a little bit more than what you're seeing on the Korn Ferry Tour. So there is a bit of money involved on the Asian Tour now, with the fact that you're not having to base yourself somewhere else. I think it's probably the primary spot the majority of Aussies should be taking in terms of their pathway.
And live will need to cultivate the players of the future for when they're older players. And they have got a bunch of older players now that must be either coming off contract soon, or they're thinking, how do we get out of their contracts? And they need to replenish them. And I don't feel like they're going to be able to replenish them with enough of the Americans. So they've got to look to other markets. So investing in the Asian Tour makes a huge amount of sense, unless they end up taking out the DP World Tour or doing some deal there.
Let's move across to this week's event. So we've got the St. Jude, the FedEx St. Jude TPC Southwind, which is a $20 million purse. This is the first of the playoffs, and all the big guys are going to be there. For the Aussies, we've got Jason Day, Cam Davis, Adam Scott, and Min Woo all competing, with Day probably in the best form out of all of those guys. Davis has obviously won recently, but Jason's sitting in 26th. So he'll be certainly targeting the Tour Championship, would be, you would imagine, his big goal.
Yeah, if he has a decent performance here, you'd have to think that he's going to almost cement his spot through to East Lake, and I think it's the top 30 that play there in the Tour Championship. Interesting to see Adam Scott at 46th, feasting on all those free FedEx Cup points that he's got from the signature event invitations, courtesy of being a PGA Tour player director.
He was probably the second biggest beneficiary of the signature event invites. Number one being Webb Simpson, who is down in 149th position. on a FedEx Cup listing. So how crazy is that? How ridiculous is that, in fact, that
Totally
he was
ridiculous.
got all of those invites into the signature events and isn't even looking at it.
At least,
Well, he's going to have.
at least Scotty made something of the invites.
Yeah.
That's just disgraceful and absolute waste of those invites.
And he didn't play the Wyndham Championship either, I don't think. God, I hope he didn't.
I didn't see him, but that's not saying much.
He's moved up two positions, so he's gone from 151 or 151st to 149, I think. I don't think he played the Wyndham Championship. If you're not going to play the final event of the regular season, you shouldn't be able to get invites to the signature event, surely.
No, I think that's true. And just having a look at that top 10 in the FedEx Cup, Scotty, Xander, Rory, Colin, Wyndham Clark's just an anomaly to me there. I think his early forms got him in there and he's hung tight. Oberg, Sahith. I was surprised Sahith was so high. Hideki, Sanjay was another one that surprised me. Obviously grinding and picking up points and just being very consistent. He plays so much that he's getting points often. And then Shane Lowry. Does anyone beat Scotty?
Rory, this is
No,
Rory
Rory.
season.
He does
The
love
FedEx
it.
Cup.
He does love a FedEx Cup, Rory, doesn't he?
He does. And he has to keep himself in that. This is where, I think this is over the last 10 years where Rory has really kept himself in the conversation of being the very best in the world. So he goes on and wins the FedEx Cup. And then he'll go and take out the DP World Tour as well. So
That's right. The race to
he'll take both of these events out and then we'll still be talking about him next year as potentially the best golfer in the world.
We'll see. And it's all there for Xander to show that he is a big cat now. And it wouldn't surprise me to see him off the back of 2 major wins and come out and just really his chest and try and take down Scotty and Rory, which would be a massive feat. And really starts to put him in a different echelon. 2 majors obviously does that to start with, but he's got the gold as well at the Olympics. So he's really blazing a trail at the moment for his career and his legacy.
And even just for this season as well, he's been so good all year, but he's only got the 2 wins. So it would be good to see him peel off another couple of wins just to put a bow on it. Scotty with his 7 obviously is out in front. Make it a little bit interesting. Get Xander up there and put a little bit of pressure on Scotty with his, maybe not PGA Tour Player of the Year, but his press or the media Player of the Year. He might be able to knock Scotty off there maybe. All right, let's move across to the Greenbrier. So this is the Live Greenbrier. This is the second last event of the season. Going into it, it looks almost like Neiman has wrapped it up. I think mathematically he hasn't just yet, with Rahm pretty much being the only one that can catch him. I wouldn't be surprised to see Rahm go and actually do that. We spoke about it the last couple of weeks. His form is trending. Neiman is playing reasonably well, but yeah, I think in terms of storylines, how Rahm finishes off the next couple of events is going to be probably the biggest on Liv.
I think Rambo will have a point to prove. He'll be still burning at the Olympics finish. And then he's had a lot of knockers, a lot of haters this year that pillared him for going to Live to start with, then continue to profess they know how he feels about his move to Live and that move to Live has washed him and that he's less competitive. Coming out and winning the individual season race would be a sweet victory for him. Certainly not beyond him, that's for sure. You've got some other players there in the top 5 in terms of Hatton 3rd and Garcia 4th. Usti has been just going about his work in 5th, and then the best of the Aussies in Cam at 6th. But Cam really hasn't had a great season by his standards, has he?
He hasn't. So then, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's bigger implications, though, for the last 2 events of the season, and that's really around the Bubble Boys. And you've got the Bubble Boys that are sitting on the lock and open zone. So those that are lock for next year, and then those that could potentially be traded by their team captains in the open zone. And then you've got those Bubble Boys that are sitting between the open and the drop zone. Those guys that are at risk of being punted and having to go into almost like a repechage in the qualification tournament later in the year.
That's probably most relevant this week. with the fact that he was suspended for this particular event. I think he said it was from Vicks or a vapor rub type of situation, was it?
Some sort of cough and flu medicine or something along those lines. I do think Vicks was the brand that was talked about, but that he then chose to take a veiled pot shot at the PGA Tour in his response, saying at least Liv actually, I don't know, I couldn't really follow the logic in taking the pot shot, even if it's true. I don't think it was the right play.
I agree. I don't think it was really necessary, but that's the world we're living in, isn't it?
Certainly is.
Now, I'll tell you though, he's got to feel pretty safe. Like even if he doesn't make that bubble, Captain Brooksy isn't going to look too. I don't think he's going to look down his nose too much at someone having a good time, like someone partying and getting done for drug offences. I think was after his PGA victory last year. We saw him at the ice hockey.
That's right. He was certainly having a bit of fun. And I did think those that live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, because remember DJ is one of the big players on the Live Tour who probably wasn't sanctioned by the PGA Tour as much as he should have been back in the day. Yeah, interesting course of attack there from GMac, and I didn't really understand it.
Agreed. Now, we are seeing Charles Hale III is coming back in. So Catlin's been kicked out of the Crushers. He conveniently now gets to roll in and join the Smash team with GMac's absence. He looks like he's going to continue to be a fixture. Maybe he doesn't get to play in the last round, but he's actually, I think, potentially a chance to lock up he already has with his first place position in the international series. But if he can get inside that lock zone, it's pretty much guaranteed regardless of what happens.
Yeah, he's really between the lock and open zone, which is quite surprising because he's missed quite a few tournaments.
Yeah.
That's right. So he'll certainly be wanting to have a strong performance and move himself into that lock zone.
Do you think we see Laurie Cantor come back? So I think he won on the European Tour, so he's locked up his position now. Do you think he's going to come back and maybe compete in the qualifying event again?
It's an interesting situation. I think he's played 2, maximum 3 events for Liv this year. Then, as you say, he's gone and played quite a few DP World Tour events, one on that tour, half in, half out, or a bit in, bit out. Look, the money could be life-changing on Liv versus what the purses are on the DP World Tour. I think a lot will depend on where the negotiations are at, and if there are any negotiations between the PIF and Liv and the DP World Tour. It's all sort of very murky, and I don't know whether the players have any better insight into that. But if you're in Cantor's position, if we do end up seeing him trying to re-qualify for Liv next year, that might be an indication of where things are.
Yep, I think you're right there. All right, let's jump across to the Women's Scottish Open. So that's at the Dundonald Links. It's a $2 million purse. Boutier was speaking about it. The Olympics is the defending champion. And that is, obviously, it's the warm-up event for the Women's Open next week at St Andrews.
Not too much to really say about this event. I think it'll be really good viewing. It'll be good links golf. Probably not bad timing for us here in Australia to be able to watch it in the evening. And so I'll certainly be tuning in to see how the women play there at the old course at St Andrews.
We've had a good run, haven't we? With pretty much all the way through July and now pushing into the majority of August as well.
We certainly have. There's been some excellent tee times or coverage times for us. You're a bit more of a late nighter than I am. I'm a bit more of a bird, but we certainly have got our fix of golf in recent months.
We touched on GMac's failed drug test. Yeah, interesting. They seem to be doing a pretty good job of, or at least on the surface, policing or maintaining some sort of semblance of following the rules, aren't they? So we've seen a few pace of play violations. I think we've seen we've heard about some maybe some equipment testing as well, potentially. I think maybe drivers, or maybe I'm making that up.
I mean, it does surprise me a little in the sense that Slugger White's is the chief rules official, I think, at Liv, and we saw him be very lenient on some of the PGA Tour players when he was back there. So maybe it's just a function of the environment, but it is good to see Liv showing some teeth where they think it's needed. Whether someone should get a suspension or one tournament suspension for using Vicks, I don't know. I guess they know the rules and they should be checking these things, but it does seem over the top.
Yeah, I think that just applies. Although it is changing. I think it's slowly changing. We've just seen the Olympics. I think there is a big, maybe like a VC backing trying to get out have the exact name for it, but I think it's the Enhanced Olympics. So there's some big VCs over in America who are playing on the fact that, hey, drugs and this type of, well, not necessarily drugs, but performance. And
there's a performance enhanced sport. And
yes.
We've seen what James Magnuson talking about that locally from a swimming.
I think so it's changing, I think, because it's certainly changing. And certainly in the fitness industry as well. It's quite big fitness in terms of bodybuilding and whatnot in terms of, and we're seeing it enter culture really. So a lot less of the sort of the drinking and whatnot and more about these other sort of cleaner, I guess you could say, enhancements. But yeah, it's interesting. So it's probably a little petty and it is something maybe it's going to need to change over time.
You obviously want the sentence to fit the crime, and it's probably a question mark over that for me. If he was genuinely sick and he took some cold and flu medicine, is that worth a whole tournament suspension or a fine?
Yep. And then Bryson's coming back. We've got John Daly featured on the next Breaking 50.
Couple of big hitters there. There should be plenty of fireworks. I don't know if it's out yet or yet to be released, but I just saw it being promoted on Bryson's social channels and what. Daly's just an interesting character. He's always, anytime I've heard him talk, he's always got an interesting or an interesting perspective. Whether you agree with it or not, he's not just some redneck idiot that doesn't think things through. Like, he's got some thought to his positions, regardless of what they actually are. Interesting to see how those two go in the same cart together.
Yep.
Couple of big burly boys.
Now, I've been monitoring the YouTube sort of golfing scene a little bit. I'm going to say that maybe Bryson isn't the biggest golf star or the biggest sort of up golf stars coming out. The one that's been growing very fast is Grace Karras. Have you ever heard of Grace Karras?
No.
Okay, so think Paige Sporadic.
Yep.
Except maybe think a little bit, she might be settling or crossing over a little bit more into the OnlyFans style content as well. But she is just overtaken the PGA Tour in terms of subscribers. So she's now sitting at not far off Good and Rick Shields as the top two there. And the big things that she's seeing is the average views per video. Here's a good one. Views per video. We've got Rick Shields at around 350,000 per video. Good 800,000. Bryson at 1.2, 1.3 million. Grace Karras at just under 1.8 million per video.
They are big numbers.
They are big numbers. So she might actually be, to be honest, the richest YouTube golfer.
That's incredible from someone that I've never heard of. So maybe I need to get into YouTube golf world in a bit bigger way.
All right. I think that's it, isn't it?
That's it for this week.
Oh, brilliant. Good to chat again. Thanks for listening to or watching on YouTube. If you watch this on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again next week.